I still recall the day I set out on my own. Not much at all, but dreams to make it all gone. Then came the time, standing for all that I knew. It's in the night, taking the pain that I lived through. You at my side, finding the strength to move ahead, crossing the line with help and love from a friend, holding the light that many thought was dead. I've ridden the wind with the sun in my face. I rode in the wind in the cold and rain. No, I wouldn't change my life by one day. I'll ride in the wind till I'm home once again. Too alarming now to talk about. Take those pictures down, check it out. Truth or consequence, say it aloud. Use that evidence, race it around. There goes my hero, watch him as he goes. There goes my hero, he's ordinary. Don't the best of them beat it out, while the rest of them peter out. Truth or consequence, say it aloud. Use that evidence, race it around. There goes my hero, watch him as he goes. There goes my hero, he's ordinary. my hero, leaving all the dead. You know my hero, woman so good. Yeah, God, my hero, watch him as he goes. Yeah, God, my hero, he's under there. I'll bring it down. Let me hear you sing it.
Okay. This is sort of an impromptu agenda late on a Sunday night here. Wasn't really planning on doing a show because I've been so busy. Some of you will know what I've been busy with. The introductory song there was courtesy of Paul, who is tuned in right now. I do take requests. If I like the song, I'll play the song. So yes, I thought I would come on and maybe have a cider. This is actually, I'm not a drinker. I don't really drink much at all. But this is a Summersby blackberry cider, and it is rocking. This is the best cider I ever had. So hopefully I don't turn into a lush all of a sudden. So, yeah, lots has been going on. When I started this, like I'm talking about running in the BC provincial election here, I had sort of floated this idea with people last year that we knew that next year we were going to have a provincial election, and that my general plan was to go into the riding of Rob Fleming and run against him and try to basically shake the tree and cause some attention to be sort of cast onto the issues that I'm concerned about. Now, people sort of have me, I would say, as a one-issue candidate, if you will. If I get that far, I'll talk about the nomination process here in a second. And that all I'm about is what's going on in our schools and SOGI 123, but that's not actually quite correct. So people who've been following me will know that I have sort of a broad range of things that I'm concerned about in terms of what's going on in society today. Freedom of speech, I don't think anybody in Canada has exposed the danger that freedom of speech is under right now. Whether that is just speaking generally, or whether that is speaking on campus, or whether that's speaking online. I'm sort of one of the quintessential examples of Canada of what's going on with cancel culture and the assault on freedom of speech in general. So that's a big issue for me, and it's an issue that I've taken up in court. So I was dragged into court on this case with the father who's been forced to facilitate his daughter's sex reassignment via pharmaceutical medications. I was dragged into that case, and quite quickly that case sort of, at least from the perspective of my role in it, transformed into a free speech case, and addressing the issue of whether or not, in this case, doctors are able to hide behind the robes of the court to avoid public scrutiny and public accountability, which they've been doing on the issue of transgender children and all of the laws and policies and programs related to that. They have claimed that they're under some sort of mortal threat, so they're hiding behind the court. And people like me who have been working to sort of expose what they're up to, expose what the danger is, expose who I believe are the most critical figures for the public to know about and focus on. basically not letting me do that. So I went into court, and this transformed into a free speech case, and it's actually sort of branched off. So the main case has sort of gone off on its own direction, and a separate case has kind of emerged out of that, and that is between myself and the doctors involved in this case, who are still protected by publication ban by the courts from being talked about in public and exposed for what they're doing. So this new case has been sort of come out of that. Now, the last time I was in court, I basically on my own, without representation, was able to defeat an army of lawyers on the other side and essentially win my case. I mean, it wasn't a full victory, but it was certainly a kind of victory in the sense that the judge ruled that as a political activist, that I should be allowed to speak about the doctors involved and identify them in my public talks and such. But the moment I was granted that victory by the Supreme Court, immediately the lawyers for the other side had all their paperwork ready, and they appealed it. So it was sent off to the BC Court of Appeal, where it sort of has been in limbo there ever since the COVID-19 thing. I'm going to have to push that again soon as well. So free speech is a big thing for me, and what's happening in terms of public discourse and freedom in general is a very big concern for me. I'm worried that what we're seeing in society today are moves towards increasing government powers, and I think that that needs to be talked about in our legislature and exposed. And somebody needs to actually, in my opinion, walk through the middle of this and try to be sort of a calming voice between what's becoming increasingly polarized sides in a debate. So that's a very big concern for me. I'm also very interested in corruption. So people have seen my public talks will know that one of my big things is exposing pharmaceutical corruption and the science that I believe has been tainted by vested interests. Those vested interests have their paws all over government too, and they need to be driven out because that's not how government is supposed to function. Okay, the government is supposed to answer to the people, not to moneyed interests. At least no more than any other person out there. So that's another big issue for me. But of course, the big one that's sort of one of the things that I'm hoping to drag out into public debate in this election would be, well, there's actually a few things linked in. So SOGI 123. Okay, so SOGI 123, everybody knows I've been sort of labeled an anti-SOGI 123 activist. Well, I'm more than that, right? So I'm about women's rights to privacy and these types of things. So I believe that even though I dress kind of femme and stuff, and I wear makeup and stuff, that this does not transform my sex. Okay, I'm still male. I identify as transgender, but I'm still male. And I would say that I identify as transgender, but I don't identify as male. Male and female are not things that you can identify as. These are things you either are or are not. That's the end of the story, right? So I can express any way I want in the world. If I want to wear skirts and if I want to wear makeup, that's my business, right? People can think whatever they want about me and think that I'm a terrible sinner and all of these types of things. That's all fine and good. But I can't sort of force others to surrender physical reality for me, right? That's my issue. So like if I'm wearing a skirt and stuff and I'm out in public, and I need to use a washroom, I use the men's room, right? And what happens to me in the men's room? Nothing ever happens to me. Nobody's ever beat me up or done anything, vicious towards me in a men's room. Sometimes I've gotten funny looks. Sometimes I've had, sort of chuckles directed at me. But that's about as bad as it ever got, right? So I don't think there's any reason why transgender identified persons can't use the facilities and sports that corresponds with their biological sex. So that's an issue, right? And it's kind of related to SOGI 123, because in SOGI 123, basically the recommendations in there are basically to teach all of these kids that you can go into whatever washroom or facilities or sports that corresponds with your gender identity, right? And I would say they're brainwashing and conditioning an entire generation, and that needs to stop. So this issue needs to be dragged out. Of particular concern for me in SOGI 123. Okay, so like a lot of the people who support me are sort of, I would say, excuse me, opposed to SOGI 123 for broader reasons than I am. Okay, so I haven't put a whole lot of focus on the sort of what some people would call the sexual aspects of SOGI 123. It's not really a sex ed program, but the sex ed programs in schools will have to sort of, or they are encouraged to draw upon SOGI 123 resources, because that's what SOGI 123 is, right? So I realize that that is a problem. I realize that they sort of go over the top with some of their sexualization of kids and stuff. And I addressed this a bit the last time I did an agenda, which I can't post to YouTube because the producers of the movie Cuties didn't feel my review was, well, they thought it was a copyright infringement or something, but it's not. It's like 9 minutes or something of select scenes, much of which I had muted. But in any case, I talked there sort of about the fact that there are real sort of issues going on in society today that needs to be addressed, I think, by either the parents or by the schools. But whether it's the parents who address these issues or whether it's the school who addresses these issues, I think that decision of what to do along those lines should be with the parents. I don't even think in today's day and age that we should have sex ed in schools at all anymore. Okay. And people are always quoting me out of context when I make this comment. I'm not saying schools shouldn't offer sex education. I'm saying it doesn't need to be in schools. So because there's so much controversy around sex education, what there should be is, 6, 7, a dozen different sex ed programs that are tailored for different worldviews and different value systems and these types of things. And they should be available online. And the parents, where the parents are involved, it gets a little complicated when you're talking about foster kids and stuff. But where the parents are involved, they should have the say as to which sex ed program they want their kids going through, right? And they can review it themselves ahead of time. I don't think it needs to be in schools anymore. Why sort of throw everybody into the same basket and create this sort of bubbling cauldron of frustration and animosity in the community when you can just take sex ed out of schools and let parents decide for themselves what they want their kids to be exposed to in terms of this. Like in the old days, it was just basically how biology works and some of the basic do's and do nots, age appropriate, of course. Now they sort of get into every sort of crazy thing you can imagine. It was the case in Alberta of the school there where what was it? The kids were taken off campus and to some guy's place where he had a rocket ship that was shaped like a penis and it had writing on it that said "Explore Uranus." A little inexcusable. But you shouldn't. The point is that so one of the things that one of the early things I did in terms of SOGI 123 is when I was going through the resource pools, I discovered they were showing the movie Brokeback Mountain in schools. And I went, well, this is clearly an adult movie. Why are they showing this to kids in schools? And it had been there's a what they call a lesson plan that comes with each resource in SOGI 123. And there was a lesson plan that went with Brokeback Mountain. And it had been downloaded like 500 times or something by teachers in BC. So it was getting extensive use. And I sort of exposed this and said, like, this isn't inappropriate to be showing this in schools without parental consent. And so we, between myself and Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, we created, a bit of a controversy and a lot of pressure on Well, it was actually focused on Glenn Hansman at that time, who was the big defender of it. And Glenn Hansman um, engaged us in the debate for a while, but then he realized he had a problem, so he disappeared and he went and they pulled Brokeback Mountain out of the program. So that was like one of the early victories that we had in terms of SOGI 1, 2, 3. But the thing is that so you got 30 kids in a classroom from all different sort of value and belief systems. There's no necessity to have them all exposed to the same thing. Some parents might be okay with their kids being exposed to Brokeback Mountain. Okay, all right, if you're okay with that, whatever. But for parents who aren't, like from Christian homes and stuff, they shouldn't, like their kids shouldn't be forcibly exposed to this stuff if they don't want them to be, right? So in terms of some of the sexual materials and stuff, that's my attitude about SOGI 1, 2, 3. But my primary concern about SOGI 1, 2, 3 has to do with the gender identity issues, right? And the fact that I believe and have statistics supporting, and we have sort of a high profile case illustrating the fact that exposing kids to these sort of confusing materials like I Am Jazz, for instance, which sort of creates this magical sort of fantasy story about a boy who sort of is trapped in the wrong body and blossoms into a young girl, right? These kind of sort of confusing fairy tales and stuff are having a very damaging effect on the most vulnerable kids who are sort of buying into this idea that they can transform into the other sex, and then trying to read the comments here, and then being put on this path that leads towards using puberty blockers and synthetic hormones and all this type of stuff, and being chemically castrated and sterilized. Okay, and frequently with young girls and stuff going on to get double mastectomies. Occasionally, as young men, the boys might get their genitals removed, or well, not removed. What they actually do is too gruesome to illustrate for you. They essentially, well, I'm not going to get into that. It's a gruesome process, though. So very damaging, though, right? So I don't think that schools should be doing anything that puts this idea in the minds of children. Okay, this is an adult theme. As everybody knows, I'm sort of, or everybody who follows me knows, I've been working for some time to get a national inquiry into what's happening with our most vulnerable kids. But this, this path towards going on all of these toxic medications and physically altering medications starts in the schools. And SOGI 1, 2, 3 is as insidious as it comes. And in its design, it is difficult to police because it's really up to the professional autonomy and discretion of individual teachers in terms of whether they use the materials or not. So some teachers will use the materials and some teachers won't. And there's no sort of accountability mechanism in place for that either. So I would say that SOGI 1, 2, 3 is dangerous to our most vulnerable children. People like Rob Fleming, who I'll be running against, have been avoiding this subject and mischaracterizing it, and I would say deceiving the people of British Columbia. So one of the things that I would be hoping to try to do if I get on the ballot, and it's not set yet. The tally is, I think we're about 62 or 63 nomination signatures. We need 75, but they recommend that 75 is the minimum, but they recommend having a buffer in case the elections office finds any that they can disqualify, right? And in my case, they might be looking at my nominations very carefully, because I don't think that Rob Fleming's going to be particularly thrilled about the prospect of having me wandering through his garden, if you will. But I plan on not only wandering through his garden, but pulling a few weeds along the way and exposing some of the creatures that are crawling underneath the surface there. So we're close to getting the number of nomination signatures that we need. I would say I need another 25. It sounds like a small number, but when it's in a very small area and you don't actually live there like me, it's not quite as easy as you might think. But supposing we get those, then I pretty much have everything else I need to run as a candidate against Rob Fleming, and to do everything in my power to create as much publicity around it as possible. It is a liberal stronghold. By liberal, I mean like, being liberally inclined, not the Liberal Party, because the Liberal Party in BC is not really, well, they're kind of like the federal Conservatives in the sense that I would say that they are socially liberal, but fiscally conservative. So this riding is heavily sort of NDP and Green Party, right? So I'm walking right into the mouth of the lion there, and it's a very tall order. The Liberal Party and the BC Liberal Party in the last election barely registered in that district, so I know that it's a tall order. However, I'm a little bit of a different character, and I'm hoping that between the support I might get from the Christian community, because they know that I defend Christian values in the sense of Soji 123. I believe that Christian values and beliefs on key issues should not be trampled upon by our school system. So I've been a big proponent of protecting Christian rights and values in our school system and making sure that they're not trampled, and other things along that line. So between the Christian vote and maybe the feminist vote, because I am sort of a loud, sort of hardcore defender of women's right to privacy and their own sports and these types of things, maybe I can rustle some votes up in that, heavily NDP Green Party district. But the way to do that, I think, is to try to create as much publicity as possible. And I have some people who are getting excited about the prospect, because in British Columbia, there is probably no better person who is better qualified to take on our education minister in an election debate. He's going to have trouble with me. Okay, I know my subject. I know my subject like the back of my hand. Okay, and I know how to present this subject in an intelligible way that most people have never heard before. And I intend on making them hear it and maybe changing some people's minds, and also talking about the issue of how we've gotten here in society. And the way that we've gotten here, particularly with this transgender thing, is that this was an elite agenda that came down from the top, and that is benefiting the pharmaceutical industry in a big way, like to the tune of billions of dollars, right? So it is a cash cow, and they have their greedy, greasy, corrupt paws all over this. And so this is something that needs to be addressed too. A government, so when a government is, I would say the government has been derelict in its duties. Okay, so if you want to put programs and stuff in schools or programs in our society and stuff, you need to do your homework, right? And you need to understand the implications of what you're doing. And Rob Fleming seems relatively uneducated on this subject, or he's deliberately deceptive. Now, if he's deliberately deceptive, he needs to be held accountable and he needs to be exposed, right? So we'll see what we can do along those lines. Just see if I can catch up on the comments here. Cannabis freedom of expression, not freedom of speech. How do you explain this to the average person? Okay, so I'll bring this up here. Canada has freedom of expression, not freedom of speech. How do you explain this to the average person? Okay, going all the way back to my university days. And when I sent or had people go out and hit the pavement to get nominations for me in the riding, they asked me for a brief bio, and I kind of forgot to mention my educational background. I sometimes overlook that, but I did graduate from Simon Fraser University with degrees in history and political science. And even going back to, like, if we go all the way back to my days in university, I was a free speech advocate on campus. So I've been very interested in free speech for a long time. Now, freedom of expression is, yeah, that's something you'll hear from the other side all the time, saying, yeah, you're not guaranteed freedom of speech, you're guaranteed freedom of expression. Well, they are different things. But if you look at what the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled, they have ruled over and over again that freedom of speech is a fundamental to freedom of expression, right? You can't have freedom of expression without freedom of speech. So freedom of speech is encompassed in freedom of expression, right? And the courts have reaffirmed this over and over again. It's the only place where you're going to get a debate about this is going to be like with, the nuts who want to justify silencing people. So, yeah, the whole we don't have freedom of speech is nonsense. We do have freedom of speech. It's just encompassed under the definition of freedom of expression. Kathleen Nam is one of my songs when I'm having a tough time sometimes. Can sex be elective? Sex cannot be elective with one possible, I would say, kind of exception, and that would be intersex. I don't mean DSD, okay? Not developmental sexual disorders. No. Developmental sexual disorder will be somebody who, for instance, because of hormonal anomalies or genetic anomalies, their genitals don't develop in the normal way. So you'll get males with micro penises and stuff, right? This is this whole debate around this Semyonev athlete, track star, who's won all of these women's events, but kind of looks like Semyonev is somebody with a DSD. And so it's actually male, but because the genitals didn't develop in the same way, has said, okay, I'm a female. But that's not really true because the genetic structure is actually still male. So in the case of DSDs, you're either male or you're female. In the case of a true sort of genetic anomaly that would be classified as an intersex, that's a little more complicated, right? So that's would be sort of on a basis by basis or case by case basis for the medical profession to decide how to resolve. And it's a very, can be a very sort of frustrating condition for people to suffer from. And I think that everybody can sort of agree that, you need to make some sort of allowances for true genetic anomalies. But you can't choose your sex. You either are or not. So I had this, so I've had this discussion many times, right? That you can choose to be transgender, but you can't choose to be male or female. You either are or you are not. So you cannot elect to be one or the other. You can pretend or sort of portray yourself as the opposite gender, as I do, right? Guys don't usually wear shirts or the skirts and these sparkly women's clothes and the makeup like I do. These are sort of socially associated with women. But that, because I wear all this stuff, it doesn't magically transform my sex, right? I can choose to live like this and choose to present like this. And there are certain reasons people might want to do that, intelligible reasons that is, for the most part, none of anybody's business, right? So people can live and express as they want, but you can't change your sex, right? So no, it's not an elective thing. Can sex ed be elective? Well, that's well, no, sex ed is not an elective course. I believe it's required, but like I say, it doesn't have to be in the classroom, right? So I believe in today's day and age, it can be something where kids go home early or something, or they come in late or something, and there's a designated time for them to do the course online, and of course that's tailored to suit the values and concerns of the parents in question. What to do with foster kids is quite a different story, but I wouldn't be quite so concerned what they're doing with foster kids, because I was a foster child myself, right? So I'm very concerned with what's been going on with foster kids in British Columbia. With foster kids, I would say I wouldn't be as concerned about what they're doing with foster kids in terms of sex education as I would be with the whole gender thing. Okay, so all this gender nonsense, I think, needs to be taken out of schools completely, like not at all, right? You maybe can, boy, it's a tough one. Start discussing this in like social studies or something like that once you get into high school. Certainly in the younger grades, I don't think there's any reason to be discussing it. Or if they say that we need to discuss it, we need to really seriously evaluate how it's being discussed, right? And there needs to be some sort of consensus on how it's going to be discussed, and make sure that it's being discussed in a way that's not romanticizing it, which is what they're doing right now. Are you planning for provincial for the provincial election? My suggestion is to stick with the governance of what power the provincial government can legislate, although I think freedom of speech. Okay, so freedom of speech, because of human rights stuff, there's some crossover there between federal and provincial powers. But yes, I'm running in the provincial, or wanting to run in the provincial elections. I don't have the nomination yet. I'm close, but I don't have it yet. But if I do, I'm going to be running in the provincial election. But for me, this is, like, to be quite honest, I don't even have a clear, like, it seems almost like my political activism has sort of taken on a life of its own, and it kind of sort of drags me around behind it. So my original intentions have sort of transformed, and I've become involved in much more than I originally intended to be involved in. This is, I believe, a federal issue as well, because the gender thing crosses provincial lines, right? And there's so much overlap, and so many of the people who are designing the educational programs are sort of working together behind the scenes, like Christopher Wells, who's actually in Alberta, was involved in SOGI 123 in British Columbia, and other players from around the province similarly involved behind the scenes. So this is a federal issue, and as I am a Canadian, being a former foster child, I'm concerned with what is happening to our most vulnerable children everywhere in Canada, not just in British Columbia. But I certainly will address everything provincially that I can. And yes, freedom. So gender identity issues are a big issue for me, of course, but also freedom of speech. And this is becoming a very, very serious issue, particularly with what's happening on social media. And people need to understand that social media isn't just social media. It's not just a private company. This is a company that controls or influences heavily what people think. That kind of power has to be monitored and regulated, right? And you've got two ways of doing that. You can crack down on it, right, and make it more difficult to speak on there, or you can ensure that it is as free and open as possible, right? And I think the latter is the proper way to be going, but it needs to be done, because if most people are getting their information from online sources and social media, that's important. Okay, you can't give people like Morgane Auger and Rob Fleming and stuff a voice on social media, but then say that I'm not allowed to have a voice. Okay, because that is a political decision that has political consequences. So that is something that needs to be addressed. Plus corruption. Okay, SOGI 123, I believe, has corruption at its core, particularly with the science that's driving it. So another huge issue. And I would say that one of the key things, so if I get into office, and one of the key things that I would want people to consider is that what I would offer to the public is not just more of the same, right? What I would offer to the public is a voice of accountability in the legislature, right? A critical eye is watching everything and, watching for corruption constantly and saying things that others aren't maybe willing to say and bringing up things others aren't willing to bring up. That's what I would bring to the legislature. But I have concerns that go way beyond the province, which links in with my national inquiry that I've been. Derek Sloan has sponsored my petition calling for national inquiry, but it's kind of hung up in limbo too, much like my court case. I'm from Gender Critical Humans. Hi, how long have I been talking? I've been talking 43 minutes, mainly talking about my election bid here in British Columbia, because I'm going to be running, hopefully, if I get the nomination for MLA against our education minister here, where I plan to go after him on particularly gender issues in our educational system and the fact that they're brainwashing all these young kids and stuff. But that and much more, like women's rights and the fact that men are sort of being granted status as women and stuff and accessing women private spaces and stuff like that. So, yeah. No, the province can't change the Charter of Rights or Freedoms, but every province that I'm aware of has their own human rights code. So there's an overlap there, right? So sometimes they'll conflict. So a province might make a ruling in terms of human rights and, fine somebody or censure somebody or something like that. And it can be appealed federally through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms too. So it's sort of there's an interesting relationship there too. Rob Fleming is the Minister of Education. So his specialty is educational things. He's an interesting character. I don't regard him as sort of the leading intellectual in the NDP cabinet. So it's interesting. But that's his primary thing. But I mean, for the most part, he's NDP, which is left-leaning. Some people call it socialist. If they're socialists, they're pretty poor socialists. They pretty much abandoned most of the average people during the COVID-19 thing, which a true socialist wouldn't do. So they're quasi-socialist, sort of kind of beholden to unions. I mean, unions are becoming so weak that it's not as strong as they used to be. And then, like almost every other party, have corporate influences tweaking their decision-making process. Well, we'll see what happens. This will be interesting because this will not be the first time that I've gone after Rob Fleming, right? I've done this before when I was staging rallies in Victoria and stuff like that. And also when I did a talk tour in Victoria, I don't remember which one it was, but I basically found out when Rob Fleming was going to be in town and in his office. And I said, okay, I understand you're in the town this day. I'm going to be in town this day. I'm out there doing public talking tours on SOGI 123. I'm going to be in your neighborhood. So I'm going to come by and maybe we can have a brief chat about the issues. And I sort of said, I'm going to come by, whether you invite me or not. And I'll wait and hope that you'll talk to me. Well, what was Rob Fleming's response? Rob Fleming's response was to close down his office for the day, give the staff the day off, and warn the neighbors. So he went to the businesses next to his office there and warned them that I was coming, like I was some sort of, dastardly Mexican bandito, like a band of Mexican banditos coming into town to, shoot up the town or something. Look out, Jen Smith's coming. The owner of the restaurant next to where he works came out and talked to us, because there was a group of us there, and said, thought it was kind of funny that Rob was warning us about you guys. You seem kind of harmless. And so, yeah. So he's got a history of running and avoiding the subject. So I fully anticipate that if I get onto the ballot, that pattern is going to continue. And if there is a regional debate, which I am certainly going to be encouraging, that he will try to make sure that I stay out of the debate. Right. I think that's what will be his agenda. Now, if he was a really sort of confident in his positions, and the strong intellectual, powerful mind that he claims to be, he shouldn't be afraid of me, right? He should be more than willing to debate me on these issues and just sort of shoot down, like he's sort of in the past implied that I and others like me are out there sort of spreading falsehoods and lies and stuff. Well, if that's the case, then let's have a debate, and you can use your superior knowledge to expose me for the liar and the fraud that I am, right? But I'm not going to hold my breath that he's going to step up to the plate that way. So I may have to chase him a bit, proverbially. I have proved that. Well, I mean, I've proved it as much as you can prove that the pharmaceutical industry is involved in this. Okay. So anybody who's seen my public talks knows that I show all kinds of conflicts of interest. Now, extensive conflicts of interest in the science and in the policy setting process is not in and of itself proof, but these people are careful. They're not just going to leave, outright proof for you there. But there are reasons why we have. So, for instance, when scientific papers are written, there are conflict of interest declarations that are required, and there's a reason we have these in place. The problem with these declarations is that people will declare. Sometimes they will declare their conflicts of interest with pharmaceutical industries or other vested interests, but nothing ever happens with it, right? It's like, okay, yeah, these people have conflicts of interest, and it's just like it's it's an eyebrow raiser, but nobody ever does anything about it, right? So that's a problem. But I mean, you don't want people coming out of financial relationships with the pharmaceutical industry and then producing science that's ultimate result is to enrich the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, that's an unacceptable conflict of interest. When you see conflicts of interest like that, I believe that science should be crumpled up and thrown into the trash can. Okay, especially when it involves permanent changes to children and the human body. So I have done this more than once, looking at the role of the pharmaceutical industry in WPATH, for instance, and the Endocrine Society, and all of this stuff. I've got plenty of proof along those lines. And certainly if I got into the legislature, I would be presenting all of this, right? Now, if what I was saying about companies like AbbVie, for instance, if what I was saying about them having conflicts of interest in the science and the decision-making process, if that was false, they would sue me, right? But they're not going to sue me because it's true. And the last thing they want is me bringing this truth to the table. If I was elected, I'd be elected as an independent. So that, I wouldn't be managing portfolios, but I would say that my natural sort of place would be on issues related to child and family development, because I'm a former foster child. My educational background is in history and political science, but my lived experience has to do with being transgender and also being a foster child and understanding the foster care system and what kids go through in that process and what it is to be a foster child. So if I was going to get involved in something, that would be a natural for me. Freedom of speech would be a huge issue, and anything to do with exposing corruption, right? But it's not like I'm going to be part of the cabinet or something, being independent. Been discussing with a couple of parties whether or not there'd be a possibility of me sort of running under the banner of a political party, but that's just speculative at this stage. Right now, I'm still looking at running as an independent. But any way you spell it, whether I run as part of a party or as an independent, even if I was elected, and keep in mind this is a liberal stronghold, right? So the odds of anybody but the NDP getting elected there are slim. But if some sort of miracle happened, I would be a voice for people in the legislature. That's what I would be. I'd be a voice for integrity and honesty and not business as usual, right? Somebody who's always going to look at things with a critical, skeptical eye and say, wait a second, right? Okay, let's take a little closer look at this. And okay, you've appointed this person and that person. Let's take a look at these people. What is their background and stuff? So I would be sort of a voice for accountability and for honesty and integrity and for our most vulnerable children. Okay, so I have some similarities with people who are sort of more anarchist in their way of thinking, sympathy with them. Okay, I'm not an anarchist myself, but they're right in the sense that you can get into a situation where you've got too much government, right? So I think the basic engines of government and the bureaucracies are already in place. There's very little that an MLA needs to do in a particular riding, except for deal with issues as they arise and look for solutions to them, whether that be waste management or even things like job creation and education and all of these types of things are all issues. I would say right now one of the most pressing things for everybody in British Columbia is the erosion of freedom, whether people are aware of it or not. So this is an issue that needs to be raised into public awareness, and people need to understand that their democratic institutions, in my opinion, are in jeopardy. And I would sort of work to sort of expose why I think that is and the dangers that I think are lurking out there. Okay, so a lot of it is theoretical, but there are dangers there. And this comes out of my history background, right? And sort of having observed the way totalitarian regimes have risen over the course of history and around the globe. And we see some of those patterns developing here today with the government seizing more and more power. So I would say one of the most important things for any jurisdiction is curbing government power overreaching and stuff like that. But so most of the other issues are sort of set up in the bureaucracy. And so when you become an MLA, the main thing to do is to familiarize yourself with the local bureaucracy and the key players in that process who are managing things and trying to ascertain problems at that point. I mean, I have my issues. I think the most important issues in a legislature, again, are protecting freedom and are protecting rights and other things. If and or when I get onto the ballot, I can start sort of addressing these more thoroughly. And I'm sure if I get on the ballot, the newspaper will want to know what my positions are on certain issues and take those one by one. I mean, people have to ask me what my position is on this or that or the next thing. Yeah, so that's a good point. Good point that anyone who becomes a minister tends to be a party drone. not much personality, but just follows orders well. Yeah, Orwell talked about this. Let me just see if I can find that quote. That's one worth looking up. Give a sec here. Got it here somewhere. George Orwell. There we go. In the files here somewhere. That's to your point here, Wyatt. Oh, that's a good quote from Orwell. They could be made to accept the most flagrant violations of reality because they never fully grasped the enormity of what was asked of them. There's a lot of that going on today. I mean, Orwell was just such a brilliant mind. But I can't seem to find that quote. Where is it? Oh, maybe that's it. No, some political writing. There it is. Okay, so ministers. Actually, this extends beyond ministers. There's a lot of people who are within parties who fit this description. Okay, George Orwell from 1984. Parsons was Winston's fellow employee at the Minister of Truth. He was a fattish but active man of paralyzing stupidity, a mass of imbecile enthusiasms, one of those completely unquestioning, devoted drudges on whom, more even than on the thought police, the stability of the party depended. I'm not quite sure that I would describe Rob Fleming in that way, but there certainly are people out there who are like that. Rob Fleming is, I don't know. We'll save that for later, I think. The pharmaceutical industry isn't outright hostile, but of course they freak out when potentially vital markets are threatened. They may not know they're doing harm, just being too dumb to check. Okay, well, we'll get into this debate. The pharmaceutical industry has a long history, much like the tobacco industry, of deliberately concealing things that do harm in order to protect their profits. But I'm not going to sort of unpack all of that right here. It was Kevin O'Leary, I think it was. Was it Kevin? Yeah, I think it was Kevin O'Leary who was talking about the pharmaceutical industry. And he said, only half jokingly, that if you threaten, like the pharmaceutical industry doesn't play good games. If you threaten their profits, they have shallow graves dug in the desert waiting for you, right? These people don't sort of mess around. Now, I'm not going to say that, so for instance, somebody like myself who works hard to expose them, that they're going to put me in a shallow grave in the desert, but they may try to destroy me in other ways or work against me behind the scenes. This is why private intelligence agencies exist and are employed by major corporations all the time. So that's what I would say about that. Yeah, well, we're in sort of a difficult place in society. Young people, I mean, a lot of this has to do with, I think, that parenting has really sort of gradually eroded. And I noticed this even like 20, 30 years ago, that parents were sort of developing this attitude that their number one job was to be the friend of their children, right? But I forget who it was that said that that's not the responsibility of a parent. Children will have many friends in their lifetime. They will only have one parent, and it's the parent's job to share their knowledge and wisdom with them and prepare them for life in the real world. And when parents are more interested in just being their friends, and in some cases fellow party animals, this has a direct effect on the psychology of these young people. So yeah, that's a problem. With a major portfolio, you have the advantage to include, to use your ideal free speech, sex education, trans issues, and so on. Why don't yourself qualified education minister versus the current one. Okay, so the Minister of Education is appointed by the ruling party, right? So in BC, that's likely going to be the NDP. That's why they've called an election now, because they anticipate that they'll be able to win. And if they do win again, they appoint who the education minister is. And I can guarantee you they are not going to appoint me. But I can be a critic, right? And a watchful eye, and I can be somebody who raises issues that need to be raised, and not just on education. Okay, I am sort of a critical eye for everything, right? So I'm very interested in getting at what is true and exposing conflicts of interest wherever they arise. But much of this is sort of at this stage kind of speculative. We'll see what happens. Like I say, I'm at 63 nomination signatures at this point. I need 75 as a minimum, and ideally you want a buffer there too. So I'm not there. I'm close, but I'm not there yet. And but hopefully I will be within the next day or two. I plan on going over to Victoria on probably Thursday, if I've got all of the signatures, and then filing all my paperwork and stuff at that time and paying the fee. I think it's like a $250 fee or something that you need to file. And once that is done and I get all of my rubber stamps and stuff, boom, I'm off, right? Then it's publicity time. Then it's stir the pot time. Then it's thresh the chickens out of the bushes time. So it's interesting. It'll be like if I get onto the ballot, I would like pay money to see Rob Fleming's expression when he sees my name on the ballot, because he knows who I am, right? They know who I am because I've been on this issue for years now. Other than that, I think I should wrap it up here. I just wanted to come on and give a quick update, actually. And yeah, maybe what I'll do is I'll switch over to Facebook and talk to some people on Facebook there who maybe don't go on to YouTube. Yeah, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to sign off of YouTube. Thanks to everybody for tuning in here. I'm going to head over to Facebook now and maybe repeat some of the stuff that I was just talking about, and maybe see if anybody has any other questions there. So I will talk to you all later, and wish me luck getting onto the ballot. Bye-bye.